Hey, what's going on? It's Cody here, and I thought I would do a live stream. I was messing around with some security policies and doing some study on the side, as we usually do if you're a CISSP holder or a Security Plus holder or any sort of other certification you're constantly setting. And one thing that came up was I was reading about, do I have the book? I was reading about risk management and governance and policies. And I was just thinking that a lot of these books talk about security policies overall, but don't necessarily go into real world examples. So I thought we could go through a quick example together in about 10-15 minutes. I'm just going to do a quick stream and get off. But let me see if I can share a window here real quick. I've actually don't think I've ever done this. Let's see. Can I just share that window? My live streaming, probably my live streaming window here. So hopefully, let me put this screen off to the side. So hopefully you can see my PowerPoint here. I was just kind of building one out for fun, discussing the whole security policy format and what it takes to build one out. So when you're studying for the CISSP, we talk about governance, we talk about risk, and we talk about the security policies and how they're kind of the overarching framework for the rules, I guess, in your organization. And the organization you're with right now may already have some overarching security policy, or you may be starting up a business, or you may be part of a smaller organization that's developing one or doesn't have one developed. But there's quite a few resources out there how to develop them. And the nice thing is they're very flexible. They're easy to adapt to your business, and they should be adaptable. But really, the process is like this. I've filled out a couple of these, and that's why I decided to just do a live stream. But I wanted to go back to the basics real quick. Let me just see if I can grab this. Do basic font and get rid of here. We'll just do that. I got to do that. Go something like that. But a security policy is a document that spells out the rules and expectations and overall approach that an organization uses to maintain the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of its data. And you'll hear cybersecurity and information security used a lot, but I think most would agree that cybersecurity is a subcomponent of information security. So we're talking about information security policy. We're talking about the overarching document, right? So how are we going to develop an information security policy? There's a lot of ways. Obviously, you can see my tabs here on the left. But the number one rule or the number one the first step is to get executive buy-in. Yeah, this is just a template that I pulled off of Google. But what that means is, as a security analyst or maybe a CISO or a developing security department, you need to get the business to buy into it because, after all, cybersecurity, the purpose is to bring value to a business, right? So number one is executive buy-in, and this may come in the form of a regulation or a law, or more likely a customer requirement. Maybe you've landed your first customer, or maybe you've been operating without something of a formal security policy, and you've landed like your 10th or 100th, maybe not 100, maybe your 10th or 12th customer, and they're asking for your security policy, and you're going, oh crap, we don't really have one. And then you're going to kind of scramble to develop one. So that may be one of the reasons. Now, you may be the security person or the point person that's in charge of developing this, but you can't be the one that solely develops and approves the policy, because you do need the backing of the executives. Because when you develop a policy that says we're going to set passwords to minimum whatever 12 characters, we need a symbol, uppercase and lowercase, and a number. and it needs to change every 90 days, or perhaps you're just requiring multi-factor authentication, or perhaps you're requiring, annual cybersecurity training. Those are great policies, and they may be in the document, but when you go to implement those, when you go to the procedural step that says, I'm going to reach out to our 20 employees and tell them you need to do the training, and they push back, or the managers, maybe they just don't get around to it. If you don't have that backing of the CEO or the TFO or the board, you may just be kind of stuck, and you're essentially out of compliance. Then when you, as a security officer or professional, signs off on perhaps a contract or a customer, and the customer is asking, do you have a security policy in place? Are you in compliance with it? And you say yes, you could be held liable for that policy, right? So it's all kind of steps building on top of each other, right? So we need to get the execs to buy into it so they can help you push this forward, and that's kind of from the first step to the last step, right? Because the last step is the adoption, and the first step is the buy-in. So you may get the directive from like a customer requirement dashed. It may be a business regulation. Maybe you've grown or been acquired, or you're operating in an industry that requires specific controls. That may be the start to sort of where the policy is kind of being pushed from the executives. Or maybe you're coming in with best practice knowledge. Maybe you're coming from a bigger company to a smaller company and saying, we need to build this ahead of time while we have 20 employees versus 500 employees. But in all those cases, we're going to build out this policy, or executives are going to direct us to build out a policy, or be part of a team. And then it's got to go back to the executives. We've developed the policy, we've done all the steps. It's going to go back to them or the board, and they need to sign off. And so we can include that in the security policy when we get to the adoption step. We can actually have the sign off as part of that policy. So when that customer contract does come in, or when that request does come in, we can provide the policy to the customer, and then one of those pages is going to say, "Here's everyone that signs off." So they're in on it too, right? Not just you being liable for it. So we talked about the applicable laws and regulations. There may be some controls on data that you don't need to implement if you're not a healthcare organization versus like a SaaS organization, or maybe you're completely on-prem or something, and you don't have to have certain cloud policies in place. Um, so sort of one of your first steps may be to sort of research what laws are applicable to your company, or what regulations apply. Hopefully you have a bit of an idea going into it. And then the evaluation, right? Systems, processes, and data. So, really for this, really before we're doing research. We're kind of starting to build it out. Before we even draft, we want to familiarize ourselves. Sorry, with our, maybe we have a current base policy in place, or what are our current systems and workflows already. We're going to have to work with the business as a whole, which is nice because we'll get some sort of education in place there, or some sort of a heads up that we're starting to build this policy. But we do want to evaluate sort of what the processes are, so that we can, one, either be realistic about the policy we're putting into place, or two, sort of have an understanding of what the timeline is for adopting the security policy is. If we say we're going to encrypt all data in transit, or all data at rest, that includes, all of our backups and whatever. Um, and your one of your development teams or whatever is sort of pushing back on that. That may push out your timeline, and you've got a customer that's you're waiting to sign off and provide proof of compliance with, or on your policy. Um, you want to kind of understand those processes, right? So this is going to be working with other business units, identify workflows, and you can also get buy-in from the greater business as you're kind of getting this evaluation going. Um, and then identifying I know I already kind of put in the title there. Identifying um, current systems. Maybe you've come into a business that has a number of systems in place or varying assets all over the place, right? Um, your policy covers those, or if you're not, have a plan to solidify maybe your systems so that they fall into your policy, right? Because what's a policy without the regulations? Just a piece of paper with words, right? And then um, you're identifying current data. What are you processing and storing? Is it it's everything you own? Is it customer data? Is there sensitive information, PII or something that may help sort of shape our security policy? So we've got our sort of our executive buy-in, maybe our requirements, maybe a push from a customer to develop this. We need to understand the applicable laws and regulations. So if you're in the US, you may have certain laws versus Europe versus somewhere else, right? And then down to your business level, working with your business units. If you have a developing or new security department, or I'm assuming, really, I'm taking kind of all this as an assumption that there's no security policy in place. You're going around to different business units and figuring out, like, what do you do, what's important to your day-to-day job. This may be, as a real world example, just setting up a quick Zoom meeting with, like, the department head of engineering versus the department head of sales versus department head of marketing, and it's going to take a while, right? This is not like this may not be like a 2-day project, right? This may take a couple weeks to really gather the data, maybe hold secondary and tertiary meetings to really kind of narrow down some of the important parts. But you may reach out to the marketing department and say, like, what are your processes? What are you using? What's your workflow like? And then you're going to kind of maybe craft your policy in a way that encompasses them, or maybe comes down pretty hard. I mean, up to you, right? Don't want to skip over the risks, right? So um, we have to identify potential risks. Now, what does that even mean? This is um, this is going to be a risk assessment, and we can. I kind of like just I threw this up here real quick as a sample document, blank, of course. This is going to be perform. We're going to want to perform a risk assessment, and we want to. The goal is to outline risk response procedures. I'm just doing this kind of on the fly. We're going to perform a risk assessment, outline risk response procedures, identify potential risks. We've been talking about this from our small business perspective. So compliance could be a potential risk, which is maybe why you're building the policy to start with, right? Or you could say, as we talked about earlier, you have health records, so you need to consider HIPAA when you're developing your security policy. And the nice thing is, the risk assessment can be used for other security goals or items, right? So we can do the risk assessment and start to lay out like an overall risk assessment. So perhaps that second meeting, or perhaps that initial meeting with marketing and sales and engineering, is discussing sort of their processes, their workflows. It could be something quick, and you can actually maybe shift in that conversation, 30 to 1 hour conversation, um, and talk about, sort of, from your perspective, you're the security person talking to them, right? Like, what are, like, the top three, systems or vendors you're using right now? What are the most important systems to you? Those sorts of things, to kind of figure out. It's almost like it's almost something of like a rudimentary um, business impact assessment, where you kind of figure out what's important to each department, and then maybe you can find overlap and start to kind of figure out what are the critical business processes for us to operate, and you can build off like you can build your business continuity plan and disaster recovery plan off of off the risk assessment as we're sort of building the security policy, which is kind of cool. So kind of like a two or three for one, right? So we've got the buy-in, we've got the research and understanding our laws and regulations for our business or within our industry. We're evaluating the systems and processes and the data that we're currently operating with. We're identifying our risks so that we can incorporate that into our security policy, right? So if if a risk is some sort of compliance or regulation that requires us to have a specific password policy or um, admin policy or maybe end user computing policy for screen lockouts or something, we need to ensure we have those in the policy. Um, but at the same time, if nothing calls out, I'm just kind of trying to come up with something. If nothing calls out like strict recovery times and disaster recovery plan, maybe you can be loose with that definition or exclude it. I probably wouldn't want to exclude it, but you get what I'm saying. It's you don't need to include every single item. And then the last two items here is documenting the procedure. So the policy is going to be very broad in scope. It's going to set something of the direction, right? So we're going to have the password thing is kind of easy. So we're talking about some sort of password policy, must have passwords, must have multi-factor authentication, passwords must have this. That's sort of like the minimum, right? But that doesn't talk about like the procedure to deploy those passwords or to change the passwords or all that stuff, like the how we're going to accomplish the policy. So that's where the procedures are going to come into place. And I've got like my blank SOP, standard operating procedure, which is something we can build out. I don't know if we'll get to on this video, but maybe another video. And then the last but most important, sort of looping in with that first thing we talked about, right? Where we talked about executive buy-in, is adoption and education. So what use is a policy if it does not achieve information security, right? So we need to make sure that after we've done all this research, all these items, and we've drafted our security policy, we've done the heavy lifting, and the executive management adopts it, and hallelujah. We need to make sure it's actually understood, and we've educated the business, right? So that could be a couple different things. We can. It actually would be probably helpful if I had one of these slides. Education and adoption. So that could be in a real world example, a presentation to the executives. So the executives may have tasked you with building this policy out. They may have directed you or a team to come up with this, but you've been doing all the work to build this out. You will want to go back through and make sure they understand it. So you want to take some of the broad. You don't probably have to get into the nitty gritty of every single policy item. You can provide them that for them to read in their own time. But when you're going through your presentation to get this adopted, you could cover the top line items and help educate them so they know what they're getting into as well, right? So you are probably the expert because you're building this out. You need to come in and educate them. Well, just assume that nobody understands the policy, and then take that to your end users, right? So we're going to do the presentation to the executives on the policy. Hopefully, this is sort of the same or soon to be meeting where it's being adopted, and then we need to ensure that um, for at a small company, this is going to be easier, right? I guess it doesn't really matter what size. Presentation. Let's see. Presentation. We should say adoption. Adoption of the security policy by executive manager. We want to make sure that they've signed off officially, and that would go something like you've done your presentation. Any questions? I'm guessing there's going to be some sort of clarification or cleanup to do before the final goes out. And then, depending on sort of how your execs want this, you could either one email out the policy and have everyone approve by email. There's sort of your hard um, proof validation that it was approved, and then you can include maybe the screenshots as proof. You could also take some formal minutes if you've got like a board or committee, and then have the actual formal votes recorded by someone else other than you. Or you could put it in some sort of a ticket if you have a ticketing system and have the execs sign off that way. But either way, you want to make sure you have the validation that the approval was done, right? So you've got the formal buy-in, so everyone's behind this. Next is the continuing education. So the policy should be made available to all internal users and all internal employees and contractors. A user could be someone outside the company. So we want to ensure that all of your employees understand the policy, and it needs to be available to them. So hopefully you have some sort of internal documentation system or some sort of SharePoint site or something where the employees can go to the policy to review it time by time, over time, right? They can go back to it and refer to it, perhaps ask you questions. And you could put some security controls around that, like they can't download it or something, or put a warning or something that they need approval, right? Because there could be some sensitive information in your policy about where your controls are or where they aren't. So it'd be important to keep those sort of locked down or watermarked or whatever, what have you. So we've got the presentation, we've got the adoption, and then the policy is made available to the employees so that when you're doing your presentation to all your employees, they know where to go because they may ask. And then presentation to a company. Now, this is similar to what we talked about above. You've got your like a real world example. You've got your PowerPoint slide with your policy, and you're kind of going through like what each section of your policy is. And so maybe you go at a higher level and ask employees to go to the actual policy document to review the nitty gritty and come back to you with any questions. But you've got your presentation, you're going through that, and you're providing education to the employees of what they're expected to comply with, right? And it's probably not the worst idea to do this maybe on an annual basis. If you have regular executive meetings or maybe recurring training with HR or onboarding, may not be the worst idea to have sort of that security policy as a recurring training item, right? And then lastly, I think would be an important one here, which I don't always see in books, and I've got like a resource here on the right I'm looking at. I don't actually see like sign off by everyone. So not just the adoption by the execs to get the policy published and formally approved as like a company document, but sign off and acknowledgement by your employees. So if you have it available in the SharePoint, them viewing it is not enough, perhaps. But in that document, you may have specific things about data labeling and sharing, for example, or data leakage or data loss prevention. And if you want to hold an employee accountable for non-compliance, because you may have a enforcement clause in your policy, but they haven't signed off on the policy, understanding it, you may be kind of SOL, right? You may be out of luck. So it would be important to present this policy to the company and get sign off by your employees, And that doesn't necessarily have to be you, the security person. That could be human resources, or it could be some sort of exec. But you want to make sure you have sign off, and then as a matter of procedure, I actually also don't see this one, but policy review. Once you've gone through all these steps and your company has adopted the policy and your employees understand the policy and it's in place, another thing you want to do is make sure you're keeping up, going back to kind of step two, actually three, technically step three, four, five, as your company's growing and changing and sort of in motion with the way things are with the world is changing. Laws and regulations may be changing. Executives may be coming and going. You may have different customer requirements and regulations. Risks may be ever evolving. Policy review is sort of an ongoing thing. So the document is not set in stone. It's really supposed to be a living document that can be changed over time. So um, you may you may find yourself doing annual policy review. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to change the policy because once you change it, depending on how your policy is built, you're going to need to get executive sign off again on the policy change. Someone's going to have to sign off on the policy, right? You can't be the one that both writes it and signs off on it. You need to have that separation of duties. But you want to have your annual policy review. Doesn't necessarily mean policy is being changed, right? You may go a year where everything's sort of steady. Um, and then it wouldn't be the worst idea to have, like I said, you want sign off, but annual training going with. When you do make changes, perhaps reviewing what's changed. And as your company is growing, you've gone from 20 to 30 to 40 employees, and your policies sort of made adjustments. Even though employees are going through and signing off, they may not actually understand some of the changes. So it may be good to just to include that with your whatever sort of meetings your business is having. Hopefully, you're having sort of regular or semi-regular meetings. So I've gone over time. That was really pretty rough because I'm doing this on the fly. What we should do next time is talk about a risk assessment and go through maybe a basic risk assessment. We can come up with like a fake company that makes some sort of widgets, and then go through what that means. Like, what's the asset? What is the likelihood? I spelled these that wrong. Likelihood. Oh, let's see. Spelling is not one of my strong points here. Oh, I think that's right. Nice. Maybe it is. So we can talk about assets, likelihood, impact, risk. Then you could talk about or that's you can come up with some sort of risk score. So likelihood times impact, right? Um, let's see. This can be that, and then we can have our risk score of 1 through 10, and we can come up if you want to get really fancy. Like I said, we'll talk about this next time. We can do some conditional formatting and come up with a color scale where maybe the number is 1 and this one is 5 and this one is 10. Where 1 is probably going to be low risk and 5 will be moderate and 10 will be high. Now, what's really cool is I did not expect that, but that's actually pretty accurate for a lot of those risk charts you've already seen. So we could come up with this sort of risk assessment format where the likelihood of, oh, you know what, this is actually 1 through 5. Um, so we have 1 through 5, low. I guess it's like kind of like none, low, moderate, high, critical, I guess. So you could have like the likelihood of this being hit is is this, and the impact is this, and the risk score is 25. With the current, what are the current controls? And you can list those out, and then we could talk about controls. Maybe that brings it down, and then we could say like this is this minus this. I don't know. We could figure it out. Right. So when you have your compensating control in place, bring down your risk score, and then we can come up with sort of the risk treatment plan, which you can bring back to your executive team or your manager to set sort of a goal for your security program. We'll also let's talk about this next time too. So I pulled this from NIST. This is like just a gigantic security policy. So the relay documents down here, and I'll of course post the links because there's a bunch of links. But this is kind of a good overview, of maybe what a security policy would look like. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean we need all these sections, but we're going to talk about what the purpose and benefits are of the security policy, the authority, as we talked about, that buy-in, right? And then the scope. And I don't know if there's a whole lot of change there. It's really including all systems, right? And then the information statement, which is sort of setting the guideline for the whole policy. And then we get into all the nitty gritty stuff right here, like what are the roles and responsibilities of the executive management, information security officer? What are our users responsible for? What's the CISO responsible for? And like I said, not all of this may apply. Like you may not have this person may be the same person as the CISO. And this is a what is this? 19 pages. Not bad. I gotta adjust the formatting. It's got vulnerability management in here and some other stuff. So this may not all be applicable, but we can go kind of like line by line. It might be kind of fun to just kind of build one out for your fake company, and then you could use it maybe as a guide. But when you have something like this that's 19 pages long, like I talked about, and you provide this to a customer, and you're saying this is our security policy, you're also kind of signing off saying, yeah, we comply with all this, but do you really? So we may have to come up with a lighter version of this and build it out for number one, or two. What we could do is get this approved, right? And get this pushed through, and then sort of come up with a mapping where we're going to set ourselves some sort of a timeline to meet compliance with this policy. This one, if you got 5 employees, maybe you could do it in a couple months. If you got 100, maybe it's going to take you a year. I don't know. And then once we do that, we'll work on like I said, this next video, because I'm going to get off. We'll work on the risk assessment, just a couple items to show you a real world example of sort of building out a risk assessment. I'm sure you've all done a risk assessment. We'll go through like a sample security policy for our fake company, our fake company incorporated or something. And then, for example, with this, where we talk about incident management, maybe not, we could build out like an incident response plan, or we could talk about, we could do an SOP. Since we were just talking about it, we could do an SOP for, let's see, these are all pretty good little controls, actually. We can do an SOP. I just pulled this off the internet. We could do an SOP for hardware and asset assignments or inventory management. So the policy is going to say this broadly, right? All hardware and software must be assigned to a designated business unit or individual, right? Someone must own each piece of those assets. And then our SOP may say how we're going to do that, right? How we're going to manage our assets step by step. And then I'm not going to be able to pull screenshots for this, but we could pull some hypothetical screenshots of asset inventory, and then that's kind of our control set for our SOP. We could say standard operating procedure. That's it. And then we can kind of go bullet by bullet, building out this procedure. What's it going to look like? It's going to look probably similar to the policy where we have a title, and then when it was last updated, and then the dates. So we have those validation on these. Like this is actually really good. This has revision history at the bottom, so we can see the changes, and then we can put some of the stuff into the SOP, right? So anyway, that is my live crash course, sort of testing my microphone and camera, and then building out like a little educational couple documents out here. But hopefully it was helpful. We'll get on maybe next week and talk about some of these other items. But I've been seeing some comments on some of my videos, which is pretty cool. So hopefully my CISSP training videos and other videos, CISM videos have been helpful. But chat soon.